the fragility and strength of the human spirit. In a small coastal village nestled between the restless ocean and the towering mountains, there lived a man named Anthony. His hands were calloused from years of pulling in fishing nets, his skin weathered by salt and sun, and his heart heavy from a lifetime of loss. The sea, once a source of life and sustenance, had taken much from him. It had claimed his father in a violent storm and swept away the fragile joy he had once known in his youth. Anthony lived alone now in a modest cottage by the water's edge, where the sound of waves crashing against the rocks was both a lullaby and a reminder of the delicate balance between survival and despair. He called it the little hut. The villagers admired him, not for his wealth or status, which he didn't have, but for his unwavering endurance. They whispered stories of his resilience, of how he kept going even when the world seemed to crumble around him. But no one saw the quiet moments when he stood on the shore, staring out at the ocean, feeling small, insignificant, and fragile against its enormity. One cold autumn evening, as the sky darkened and the winds began to howl, Anthony heard a soft knock at his door. He opened it to find a young girl no more than 10 years old, soaked to the bone and shivering. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her lips trembled as she spoke. I got lost," she whispered. "I was looking for my mother." Anthony's heart ached at the sight of her. He knew the pain of losing someone too well, and though he didn't have much, he welcomed her in, wrapping her in a warm blanket and offering her what little food he had. Over the next few days, the girl, whose name was Jenna, stayed with Anthony. She didn't speak much about her past or where she had come from, but the sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. She was like a bird with broken wings trying to fly again, but weighed down by invisible burdens. Anthony learned later that Jenna never knew her mother. Her mother died when she was only a baby. Her grandmother raised her, but she succumbed to a respiratory problem, and now Jenna was all alone. She lived in the orphanage in the village. Anthony saw in her a reflection of his own heart. Both of them had lost something precious, and both of them had been battered by the storms of life. Jenna returned to the orphanage, but came to visit Anthony almost every day after school. As the days passed, Jenna began to smile again. She would help Anthony mend his nets, laughing when her tiny hands tangled the ropes. She listened intently to the old stories he told her by the fire, stories of bravery and adventure that he had once believed in, but had long since forgotten. And in turn, Anthony felt something stir within him that he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Jenna spoke softly. "I don't want to go back to the orphanage." Anthony didn't know how to respond. He wanted to tell her that everything would be all right, that one day she would find a good home and a family. But he wasn't sure that would happen. He took her hand and held it tightly. "We're still here," he said, "and sometimes that's enough." At that moment, Anthony realized something he had long forgotten, that human beings, though fragile, were also remarkably resilient. They could be battered by the waves of life, broken and bent, but somehow they found a way to keep standing. The weight of loss, the ache of loneliness, it all left scars. But those scars were proof that they had survived. In the months that followed, Anthony and Jenna found a rhythm to their lives. They worked together, laughed together, and on the hardest days, they simply sat in silence, knowing that sometimes just being there was enough. The village continued to speak of Anthony's resilience. But now they spoke of the little girl by his side as well, marveling at how two broken souls could come together and find strength in their shared pain. One day, as spring bloomed along the coast, Anthony stood on the shore with Jenna by his side. The ocean, which had once seemed so cruel, now shimmered with a gentle light. It would always be vast, uncontrollable, and sometimes terrifying. But Anthony no longer saw it as his enemy. He saw it as a reminder of life's unpredictability, its beauty, and its power. As he looked down at Jenna, who was collecting seashells with a smile, Anthony understood that resilience wasn't about never breaking. It was about rebuilding, about finding hope in the smallest moments, and about allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to let others in, even when it hurt. For in their shared fragility, they had discovered something stronger than the fiercest storm: each other. One evening they stood together in the kitchen preparing a simple meal. Anthony turned to Jenna with an unexpected question. His voice, steady yet soft, carried a quiet hope. "Do you think you might want to make the little hut your home permanently?" Jenna froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. For a moment she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the weight of his words. She hadn't imagined that such a question would come, or that it would fill her with so much emotion. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at the weathered fisherman, whose rough hands told stories of years spent battling the sea, but whose heart was now laid bare before her. Without saying a word, she threw her arms around him, and Anthony, with tears glistening in his own eyes, held her tightly. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's embrace, as time seemed to stretch into eternity. In that single unspoken moment, two souls who had wandered alone for too long finally found their way to one another. A second chance to belong, to share in the simple, quiet happiness they both thought had slipped away. Together they had found the strength to keep going, no matter what the ocean would bring to their shores.